"Sir, I saw them changing the contract," whispered the janitor's daughter. The billionaire's laughter echoed through his tower, but when she described the exact clause they altered, his knees hit the floor. The 93rd floor of Sterling Global Enterprises towered above Manhattan like a glass monument to ambition and power. Alexander Sterling stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the city below with the detached satisfaction of a man who'd conquered it all by age 42. His reflection in the glass showed a figure of absolute authority. Sharp suit tailored on Savile Row, silver watch that cost more than most people's homes, jaw set in the permanent expression of someone who'd never heard the word no and meant it. Behind him, his mahogany desk, hand-carved from a single tree in the Amazon, held contracts worth billions, real estate developments that would reshape skylines, technology patents that would define the next decade, mergers that would make or break entire industries. This was Alexander Sterling's kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in expensive leather. "Mr. Sterling," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. "The cleaning supervisor is here with... There's a situation." Alexander's jaw tightened. He had 3 critical meetings today, 2 conference calls with Tokyo investors, and a charity gala tonight where he'd be photographed pretending to care about whatever cause his PR team had selected. He didn't have time for situations. "Handle it, Jennifer," he said curtly. "Sir, she's very insistent. She says her daughter won't leave the building and keeps asking to speak with you personally. Security has been trying to..." "Then have security remove them," Alexander cut her off, his patience already exhausted. "I don't have time for this nonsense." "They tried, sir. The child has locked herself in the supply closet on this floor and refuses to come out until she speaks with you. She's been there for over an hour." Alexander closed his eyes, fighting the urge to fire everyone involved in this circus. A child in his building, disrupting his carefully orchestrated schedule. This was exactly the kind of chaos he'd spent his entire life eliminating. "Fine," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze water. "Bring the supervisor to my office. Let's resolve this quickly so I can return to actual work." 3 minutes later, Rosa Morales entered his office, and Alexander felt his irritation spike higher. The woman was clearly one of the night cleaning crew. Her uniform was clean but worn, her hands rough from years of manual labor, her face lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from working multiple jobs and still falling short. She twisted her hands nervously, her eyes darting around the opulent office like she couldn't quite believe she was allowed to be there. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry for the disruption. My daughter Sophia, she's only 7, and she sometimes gets ideas in her head that..." "Mrs. Morales," Alexander interrupted, checking his watch with pointed deliberation. "I have approximately 4 minutes before my next call. Why is your child in my building, and how quickly can you remove her?" Rosa flinched at his tone. "Sir, I had no choice but to bring her today. My regular babysitter is sick, and my sister who usually helps had to work. I thought Sophia could stay quiet in the break room, but she says she needs to tell you something important." "Important," Alexander repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A 7-year-old has something important to tell me." "About what? Her favorite cartoon? A lost doll? Sir, please, if you could just talk to her for 1 minute, I promise she'll leave quietly. She's a good girl, very smart, but when she gets something in her head..." "No," Alexander said flatly. "I don't speak with children who throw tantrums in my building. This is a place of business, not a daycare. You have 2 choices. Remove your daughter immediately, or I'll have security do it for you. And Mrs. Morales, this is your only warning. If anything like this happens again, you're fired. Am I clear?" Rosa's face crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back with the practiced resilience of someone who'd learned that crying accomplished nothing. "Yes, sir. I understand. I'll get her right now." As Rosa hurried toward the door, it burst open before she could reach it. A small girl stood in the doorway, breathing hard like she'd been running. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, with dark hair pulled into slightly messy pigtails and intelligent eyes that seemed too old for her face. She wore a simple dress and sneakers that had seen better days, and she was clutching a worn backpack against her chest like a shield. "Sophia!" Rosa gasped. "How did you get out of the closet?" "The lock was easy, Mama. Sophia said, not taking her eyes off Alexander. I needed to talk to Mr. Sterling. 2 security guards appeared behind her, looking apologetic and frustrated in equal measure. Sir, she picked the lock. We didn't realize she could. Alexander held up a hand, silencing them. Despite his irritation, he found himself curious about this child, who'd apparently taught herself to pick locks and had the audacity to burst into his office uninvited. You have 30 seconds, Alexander said, his voice cold. Then security escorts you out. Speak. Sophia walked further into the office, her small footsteps silent on the plush carpet. She stopped in front of his desk and looked up at him with an intensity that was genuinely unsettling. Sir, she said, her voice steady despite her mother's horrified expression. I saw them changing the contract. The Henderson project. They're stealing from the workers. The office fell absolutely silent. Alexander felt his eyebrows rise despite his determination to remain unimpressed. The Henderson project was his newest development, a massive residential complex that would house over 2,000 families. It was also one of his most carefully guarded projects, with details known only to his senior executive team. Is this some kind of joke? Alexander asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Did someone put you up to this? Nobody put me up to anything, Sophia said with a slight edge of irritation that would have been amusing if Alexander wasn't so annoyed. I was in the conference room 2 nights ago while Mama cleaned. I was supposed to be reading in the corner, but I saw Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Chen looking at contracts. They were changing numbers. Alexander's jaw tightened. Marcus Whitmore and David Chen were 2 of his most trusted executives. They'd been with Sterling Global for over a decade each. The suggestion that they were corrupt was absurd, the fantasy of a child who'd probably overheard some conversation she didn't understand. Sophia, enough, Rosa pleaded, moving toward her daughter. Mr. Sterling is very busy. We need to go. Let her finish, Alexander said, his curiosity now fully engaged, despite himself. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Go ahead, Sophia. What exactly did you see them changing? Sophia's shoulders straightened, clearly taking his question as permission to continue. They had the worker contracts, the ones for the construction people. The original contract said workers would get paid twice a month and have health insurance, but Mr. Whitmore printed new ones that said they'd only get paid once a month, and the insurance part was deleted. Alexander's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. The Henderson project worker contracts were confidential. They shouldn't have been accessible to anyone outside the core team, and certainly not to a child hiding in a conference room. And where exactly were these contracts? Alexander asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring a particularly creative storyteller. On the big table, the one made of glass, Sophia said without hesitation. Next to the plant, with the purple flowers. Mr. Chen was typing on his computer, and Mr. Whitmore was reading from a blue folder that had Henderson Construction Phase 3 written on it. The detail about the blue folder made Alexander pause. That was accurate. His filing system used color-coded folders for different project phases. Blue for Phase 3, red for Phase 2, green for Phase 1. It wasn't common knowledge, even among employees. Interesting story, Alexander said, though his voice had lost some of its dismissive edge. And why would 2 of my most successful executives risk their careers to steal from construction workers? Because Mr. Whitmore said they could keep the difference, Sophia replied immediately. He said if they reduced the labor costs by 20%, they could redirect that money to the special project fund, and nobody would notice until the project was finished. Mr. Chen said it was risky, but Mr. Whitmore said you never check the construction contracts yourself. You just sign whatever they put in front of you. The last comment hit Alexander like a physical blow. It was true. He didn't personally review every contract. He had executives for that. Marcus Whitmore had been his director of construction operations for 12 years. David Chen had been CFO for a decade. He trusted them implicitly. But this child had just described his management blind spot with uncomfortable accuracy. Sophia, we're leaving now, Rosa said firmly, her face pale with mortification. Mr. Sterling, please. She has a very active imagination. She reads a lot of books and sometimes The contracts were printed on the special paper, Sophia continued, ignoring her mother. The thick kind with the watermark, and there were 17 pages total. Mr. Whitmore put the old ones through the shredder, The big one in the corner that sounds like it's eating metal. Alexander stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of the movement. Every detail Sophia had mentioned was accurate. The glass table, the orchid, which did have purple flowers, the blue folder, the industrial shredder in the corner that did indeed make a distinctive grinding sound. Either this child had an impossibly perfect imagination, or she'd actually witnessed what she was describing. "Mrs. Morales," Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled. "Take Sophia to the executive lounge. Jennifer will show you where it is. Get her something to eat and drink. I need to make a phone call." "Sir, I promise this won't happen again. We'll just leave and—" "Now, Mrs. Morales," Alexander said, but his tone had shifted from dismissive to commanding. "This is not a suggestion." Rosa looked confused but nodded quickly, taking Sophia's hand. The little girl looked back at Alexander as they left, her expression equal parts defiant and hopeful. The moment they were gone, Alexander pressed his intercom. "Jennifer, I need the master files for the Henderson Project worker contracts. Original versions, not the current ones in the system. Pull them from the backup server immediately." "Sir, those would be in the archived files from when the project was first approved. Are you sure you need the originals?" "Did I stutter?" Alexander snapped. "I want them on my desk in 5 minutes." While he waited, Alexander pulled up his security system. Every conference room had cameras, ostensibly for confidentiality and security purposes, but really because Alexander had learned long ago that trust was a liability in business. He rarely reviewed the footage unless there was a specific problem. But if what Sophia described had actually happened, he navigated to the conference room recordings from 2 nights ago. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., well after business hours when only the cleaning crew would be in the building. Alexander hit play and felt his stomach drop. There, in perfect clarity, were Marcus Whitmore and David Chen, exactly as Sophia had described. They were hunched over the glass conference table, the blue folder open between them. David was typing on his laptop. Marcus was reading from documents, and in the corner of the frame, barely visible behind a potted plant, was a small figure with a backpack, Sophia, watching them while pretending to read. Alexander watched as Marcus printed documents, compared them to the originals, then fed the old contracts into the shredder. He watched as David transferred files on his computer. He watched as they discussed something he couldn't hear. The conference room audio was disabled for privacy reasons, but their body language was clearly conspiratorial. Jennifer knocked and entered with a thick folder of documents. "The original Henderson contracts, sir. From the archive server like you requested." Alexander snatched the folder and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the terms, his photographic memory comparing them to what he'd signed off on weeks ago. The differences leaped off the page. Original contract, bi-weekly payment schedule, comprehensive health insurance, overtime protection, safety equipment provided by the company, current contract, monthly payment schedule, limited insurance coverage, no overtime stipulations. Workers responsible for their own safety equipment. The changes were subtle enough that they might have gone unnoticed in a routine review, but together they represented a massive reduction in worker protections and a significant cost savings, easily 20%, exactly as Sophia had said. 20% of the Henderson Project labor budget was approximately $8.7 million. Alexander sat down heavily, his mind reeling. Marcus Whitmore and David Chen, men he'd trusted, men he'd promoted, men he'd considered almost like family, were stealing from him. Worse, they were stealing from workers who were already living paycheck to paycheck, reducing their protections and compensation while lining their own pockets. And a 7-year-old girl had uncovered it by paying attention when she was supposed to be invisible. Alexander stood and walked to his window, staring out at the city without really seeing it. For the first time in years, he felt genuine uncertainty. If he'd been wrong about Marcus and David, what else had he been wrong about? How many other people in his organization were taking advantage of his blind spots? And why had it taken a child, the daughter of a cleaning woman he'd nearly thrown out of his building, to show him the truth? His intercom buzzed. "Sir, your conference call with Tokyo is ready." "Cancel it," Alexander said. "Sir? Cancel all my meetings for today," Alexander repeated. "And Jennifer? Call security. I want Marcus Whitmore and David Chen brought to my office immediately." Tell them it's urgent and non-negotiable." "Yes, sir." And the woman and her daughter. Alexander paused, thinking about Sophia's intelligent eyes, her courage in coming to him despite knowing she'd be dismissed, her careful observation of details that trained executives had missed. "Keep them comfortable in the executive lounge," Alexander said. "I'll speak with them shortly." After Jennifer signed off, Alexander returned to his desk and pulled up the security footage again. He watched Sophia in the corner, her small figure hunched over a book that was probably far too advanced for her age. He watched her glance up when Marcus and David began handling the contracts. Watched her shift position slightly to get a better view. Watched her eyes follow every movement, every document, every word they spoke that she could see even if she couldn't hear. This child had seen something wrong and had risked humiliation, her mother's job, and her own safety to report it. She'd picked a lock, evaded security, and forced her way into the office of one of the most powerful men in New York, all because she'd believed the truth mattered more than her own comfort. Alexander Sterling had built an empire on the principle that weakness was failure and sentiment was a liability. He'd surrounded himself with people who reflected those values, who prioritized profit over principles, who saw kindness as something to exploit rather than emulate. And now a 7-year-old girl had just proven that every assumption he'd built his life on might be catastrophically wrong. His phone rang. Jennifer's voice was tight with confusion. "Sir, Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Chen are here. They're asking what this is about." Alexander allowed himself a cold smile. "Send them in. And Jennifer, make sure security is standing by." As his door opened, and his two most trusted executives entered, both trying to mask their nervousness with professional smiles, Alexander thought about Sophia waiting in the executive lounge, about Rosa Morales, who'd raised a daughter with more integrity than most adults he knew, about the workers whose protections had been stolen from them by men in expensive suits who thought they were too important to be caught. "Gentlemen," Alexander said, his voice pleasant but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut steel, "we need to discuss some changes to the Henderson contracts. Specifically, I'd like to know why the contracts I'm seeing in the system are different from the ones I originally approved." The color drained from both men's faces, and Alexander knew, absolutely knew, that everything Sophia had said was true, and that meant his entire world was about to change. Marcus Whitmore had perfected the art of looking confident when his world was falling apart. At 53, he'd survived 3 corporate mergers, 2 hostile takeovers, and countless boardroom battles. His silver hair and expensive suit projected authority. His handshake was firm, his smile never wavered, but Alexander could see the microscopic tremor in his hands as he sat down. David Chen was younger, 41, and hadn't yet mastered the same level of deception. Sweat beaded at his temple despite the office's perfect climate control. His eyes darted to Marcus, then to Alexander, then to the floor. "Alexander," Marcus began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "What's this about? Jennifer said it was urgent, but we have the investor presentation in—" "The Henderson contracts," Alexander interrupted, sliding the folder across his desk. "Original versions, from the archive server. I'd like you to explain why they're different from what's currently in our system." The silence that followed was absolute. Alexander watched Marcus's face with clinical detachment, cataloging every micro-expression, the slight widening of pupils, the almost imperceptible tightening around the mouth, the way his breathing changed rhythm for exactly 3 seconds before he regained control. "I'm not sure I understand," Marcus said carefully. "Contracts go through revisions all the time. Legal requirements change, compliance issues. These revisions reduced worker payment frequency from bi-weekly to monthly," Alexander said, his voice cold and precise. "Eliminated comprehensive health insurance, removed overtime protections, made workers responsible for their own safety equipment." He paused. "That's not compliance, Marcus. That's theft." David Chen made a sound somewhere between a cough and a gasp. Marcus shot him a look that could have stripped paint. "Those are serious accusations," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "Based on what evidence? A filing error? Some confusion between draft versions and—" "Based on security footage from conference room B 2 nights ago at 11:47 p.m., Alexander said, spinning his monitor around. The paused video showed Marcus and David hunched over the contracts with perfect clarity. "Would you like me to play it? Or would you prefer to explain why you were in the office at midnight, altering legally binding contracts and shredding the originals? David Chen crumbled first. Marcus said it was just cost optimization, he blurted out, his voice cracking. He said everyone does it, that construction workers wouldn't notice the difference, that— Shut up, David, Marcus snapped, his composure finally fracturing. He turned back to Alexander, and now there was anger in his eyes instead of fear. You want to talk about theft? How about what you steal from this company every year? 20 million in personal expenses? Your yacht? Your jet? Your weekend in Monaco that somehow counted as a business trip. You built this empire on the backs of people you pay minimum wage while you accumulate obscene wealth. I pay you 3 million a year, Marcus, Alexander said quietly. Plus bonuses. Plus stock options. Apparently that wasn't enough. It's never enough, Marcus exploded, standing abruptly. 12 years I've given you. 12 years of 80-hour weeks, of missing my kids' birthdays, of sacrificing everything for Sterling Global. And you know what I have to show for it? A nice house that I barely see. A wife who's planning to leave me. Kids who call me sir, because I'm practically a stranger. So you decided to steal from construction workers? Alexander's voice was ice. People making $40,000 a year, supporting families, one injury away from financial ruin? That was your solution? Those people are replaceable, Marcus shouted. They'll work for whatever we pay them because they have no other options. That's how the system works, Alexander. You know it as well as I do. The only difference is I was honest enough to take advantage of it. Alexander stood slowly, and something in his movement made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. Get out, Alexander said, his voice soft but carrying absolute authority. Security will escort you to your office to collect personal items only. Your access cards are deactivated as of this moment. You have 48 hours to retain legal counsel before I file criminal charges. You can't be serious, Marcus said, but his bravado was crumbling. Over a contract dispute? The publicity alone will— I'm dead serious, Alexander cut him off. David, the same goes for you. If you cooperate with the investigation, I'll consider reducing the charges. If you don't, I'll pursue maximum penalties. David was crying openly now, his career and reputation dissolving in real time. My family. I have 3 kids in college. Please, Mr. Sterling, I'll pay it all back. You should have thought about your family before you decided to steal, Alexander said without sympathy. He pressed his intercom. Jennifer, send security in. 3 uniformed guards entered immediately. They'd clearly been waiting just outside. As they escorted Marcus and David toward the door, Marcus turned back with venom in his eyes. That cleaning woman's kid, he said with a bitter laugh. That's how you found out, isn't it? I saw her in the corner that night but figured she was too stupid to understand what she was seeing. Guess I was wrong. Yes, Alexander said coldly. You were wrong about many things. That 7-year-old girl has more integrity in her entire body than you've shown in 12 years. After they left, Alexander stood alone in his office, the adrenaline slowly draining from his system. He'd just fired 2 of his most senior executives. The fallout would be massive. Investor concerns, media scrutiny, internal chaos, as people scrambled to fill the power vacuum. But all he could think about was Sophia, sitting in the executive lounge, probably wondering if she'd done the right thing. Alexander walked to the lounge, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Through the glass door, he could see Rosa sitting nervously on the edge of a leather couch, while Sophia examined the abstract art on the walls with intense concentration. When he entered, Rosa jumped to her feet. Mr. Sterling, I'm so sorry about all of this. Sophia didn't mean to cause trouble, she just— Mrs. Morales, Alexander interrupted gently. Your daughter just saved this company millions of dollars and protected hundreds of workers from exploitation. She has nothing to apologize for. Rosa's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Sophia turned from the painting, her intelligent eyes studying Alexander carefully. Was I right? She asked directly. Were they really stealing? Alexander nodded slowly. You were absolutely right. Every detail you described was accurate. How did you know what you were looking at? Sophia shrugged, a gesture that seemed too casual for the weight of what she'd accomplished. My teacher says I'm good at patterns. And my mama taught me that when people whisper and look around nervously, they're usually doing something wrong. Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Chen were whispering a lot. Sophia reads everything, Rosa said, her voice still shaky. Legal documents, medical journals, whatever she can find. Her teacher says she's reading at a college level. I try to get her books from the library, but libraries don't carry advanced legal contracts? Alexander finished. He looked at Sophia with new respect. You understood what you were reading. You recognized that the changes were harmful. And you had the courage to report it, even knowing you might not be believed. Mama says telling the truth is always right, even when it's hard, Sophia said simply. Alexander felt something shift in his chest. This child, this 7-year-old daughter of a woman who cleaned his offices, had demonstrated more moral courage than executives he paid millions to employ. Mrs. Morales, Alexander said, making a decision that surprised even himself. I'd like to offer you a different position. Not cleaning, though there's absolutely no shame in that work. I need someone to help manage the new worker advocacy program I'm creating. Someone who understands what it's like to work in this building without power or voice. Rosa stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. Sir, I don't have education. I barely finished high school. I can't. You raised a daughter who recognized corporate fraud and had the courage to expose it, Alexander said. That's worth more than any business degree. The salary would be $75,000 to start with benefits, full health insurance for your family, and Sophia, he turned to the girl. How would you like to attend Riverside Academy? It's a school for gifted students, full scholarship. Sophia's eyes went wide. The one with the science lab and the library that has 10,000 books? That's the one. This is too much, Rosa whispered, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this for us? Alexander was quiet for a moment, thinking about Marcus's words, about the system he'd built and benefited from, about the workers whose protections he'd never thought to verify because he'd trusted executives who saw human beings as replaceable resources. Because your daughter showed me that I've been blind, he said honestly. And because if I'm going to fix this company, really fix it, I need people who understand what it's like to be on the receiving end of corporate indifference. His phone buzzed. Jennifer's voice was tense. Sir, the board is calling an emergency meeting. Word about Marcus and David has spread. They want explanations. Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes, Alexander said. He looked at Rosa and Sophia. Will you consider my offer? Rosa was crying too hard to speak, but she nodded. Sophia stepped forward and held out her small hand. Thank you for believing me, Mr. Sterling, she said, with a seriousness that seemed impossible for her age. Alexander shook her hand solemnly. Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth, Sophia. You saved this company. More importantly, you saved the workers that Marcus and David were exploiting. As he walked toward the boardroom, Alexander felt the weight of what was coming. Angry board members, nervous investors, media inquiries, legal battles. The comfortable certainty of his old life was gone, shattered by a 7-year-old girl who'd seen what adults had missed. But for the first time in years, Alexander Sterling felt like he was doing something that actually mattered. And it had all started because a child refused to stay invisible. The boardroom of Sterling Global Enterprises had witnessed countless power plays over the years, but the tension crackling through the air today was different. 12 board members sat around the obsidian conference table, their expressions ranging from concerned to furious. Alexander could feel their judgment pressing down on him like physical weight. You fired Marcus Whitmore and David Chen without consulting the board? Bernard Harrison, the eldest member, spoke first. At 72, he'd been with Sterling Global since Alexander's father founded it. Those men have been with us for over a decade. This is reckless, Alexander. Reckless would be allowing them to continue stealing from this company, Alexander replied, his voice steady. He activated the screen behind him, displaying the security footage. Watch. The board watched in silence as Marcus and David altered contracts, shredded originals, discussed their scheme in hushed tones. When the video ended, several members shifted uncomfortably. How much did they take? Asked Patricia Nguyen, the CFO replacement who'd just been urgently promoted. $8.7 million from the Henderson project alone, Alexander said. But that's not the full scope. Patricia, pull up the special project fund that Marcus referenced in his discussion with David. Patricia's fingers flew across her tablet. Her face went pale. Sir, there's no special project fund in any official records. but I'm finding irregular wire transfers going back 3 years, multiple offshore accounts. The amounts are—" She stopped, her hands trembling. "The total is over $43 million. The boardroom erupted. "$43 million?" someone shouted. "How did auditing miss this? Who else is involved?" Alexander held up his hand for silence. "That's what we need to determine. Patricia, I want a complete forensic audit by week's end. Every executive, every department, every transaction over $10,000 for the past 5 years. Alexander, that will cost millions and destroy morale," Bernard protested. "You're creating paranoia based on the actions of 2 bad actors, based on a systemic failure that a 7-year-old girl uncovered by accident," Alexander interrupted sharply. "While we trusted our executives blindly, while we collected our dividends and patted ourselves on the back for record profits, they were robbing us. More importantly, they were robbing workers who can't afford to lose a single paycheck. Workers are always the first to complain," another board member muttered. "They'll use this as leverage for raises. Better conditions." "Good," Alexander said, surprising everyone, including himself. "Maybe they should have better conditions. Maybe we should have been ensuring that years ago instead of maximizing executive bonuses." Bernard's eyes narrowed. "What's gotten into you? Yesterday you approved cutting the janitorial budget by 15%. Today you're advocating for workers?" Alexander thought about Sophia's intelligent eyes, about Rosa's dignity despite her exhaustion, about Marcus's contempt for replaceable people. "Yesterday I was ignorant," Alexander said simply. "Today I'm not. The meeting is adjourned." "You'll receive the forensic audit results as they come in." As the board members filed out, some angry, some confused, all uncertain, Patricia approached Alexander hesitantly. "Sir, there's something else you should see," she said quietly. "The offshore accounts. 4 of them have access signatures from other executives. This goes beyond Marcus and David." Alexander felt his stomach drop. "Who?" "Robert Kensington in legal, Sarah Thornton in HR, and—" Patricia hesitated. "Jennifer, your assistant." The betrayal hit harder than Alexander expected. Jennifer had worked for him for 6 years. She knew everything about his schedule, his business, his life. She'd been in his office that morning, perfectly professional, while secretly helping to steal from the company. "Bring me everything you have," Alexander said quietly. "Every name, every transaction, every piece of evidence." After Patricia left, Alexander stood alone in the boardroom, staring at the city below. How had he built a culture where this level of corruption could flourish? Where senior executives felt comfortable stealing millions? Where a 7-year-old had more integrity than people with Ivy League degrees and corner offices? His phone buzzed. It was Michael Torres, his head of security. "Mr. Sterling, we have a situation in the lobby. There's a man demanding to speak with you. Says his name is Carlos Hernandez. He's a construction worker on the Henderson project, and he's very upset. He has his daughter with him." Alexander closed his eyes. Of course, the workers would have heard about the contract changes by now. "Send him up." Carlos Hernandez was a man in his late 30s, wearing work boots and a flannel shirt with concrete dust still on the sleeves. His calloused hands clenched and unclenched nervously. But it was the little girl beside him who caught Alexander's attention. She was Sophia's age, maybe a year younger, with her father's dark eyes and a pink backpack decorated with unicorn stickers. She held Carlos's hand tightly, watching the opulent office with wide-eyed wonder. "Mr. Sterling," Carlos began, his voice rough with emotion. "I got a letter today saying my contract was changed, that my pay schedule is different, my insurance is reduced. Sir, I have 2 kids. My wife has a serious condition. We need that insurance. Without it, we can't afford her medication." Alexander gestured to the chairs. "Please sit. You are?" "Carlos Hernandez. I've been working on the Henderson project for 8 months. I'm a concrete specialist. And this is my daughter, Isabella." Isabella waved shyly at Alexander, then noticed something. "Daddy, that's Sophia's mama." Alexander turned to see Rosa Morales entering the office, carrying coffee. She'd insisted on working her regular shift, despite Alexander's offer, saying she needed time to think about such a big change. When she saw Carlos, her face lit up with recognition. "Carlos, Isabella," Rosa said warmly. "What are you doing here? You know each other?" Alexander asked. "Carlos lives in our building," Rosa explained. Fourth floor. Isabella and Sophia play together sometimes. Suddenly, pieces clicked into place in Alexander's mind. Sophia knows your family, he said to Carlos. She knows about your wife's illness. Carlos nodded, confused. Yes, Sophia is very sweet. She reads to Isabella sometimes. But I don't understand what... That's why she told me, Alexander said, more to himself than anyone else. Sophia, where is she? In the executive lounge, Rosa said. She wanted to finish her book before... Alexander was already moving. He found Sophia curled up in a leather chair, reading a thick medical journal that she must have found in the waiting area. She looked up when he entered. Sophia, Alexander said gently, sitting across from her. You knew about Isabella's mother, didn't you? About her condition? Sophia nodded slowly. Mrs. Hernandez is really nice. She always shares her cooking with us when she makes extra. Last month she couldn't afford her medicine and had to go to the hospital. Isabella was so scared. And when you saw the contracts being changed, you realized it would affect the Hernandez family. And all the other families like them, Sophia said quietly. Mr. Whitmore said the workers wouldn't notice the difference, but I knew they would. My mama notices when we have $10 less for groceries. I knew people like Mr. Hernandez would notice. Alexander felt something crack in his chest. This child hadn't acted out of abstract principle or desire for reward. She'd acted because she personally knew the people who would be hurt. She'd seen a face, Isabella's face, on the statistics that men like Marcus dismissed as irrelevant. Sophia, why did you wait until today to tell me? Alexander asked. This happened 2 nights ago. Sophia looked down at her hands. I was scared. I thought maybe I misunderstood what I saw. But yesterday, Mrs. Hernandez had to go to the hospital again because she couldn't afford her medicine. Isabella cried all night. I heard her through the wall. Her voice got smaller. And I thought, if I didn't say something, if I was too scared to tell the truth, then I was part of what hurt Isabella's mama. So I had to tell you, even if you didn't believe me, even if you got mad. Alexander had to look away, blinking hard. A 7-year-old girl had overcome her fear to protect her friend's family. She'd risked everything on the chance that he might listen. Come with me, Alexander said, standing. There's someone who needs to meet you. Back in his office, Carlos was explaining his situation to Rosa, his voice breaking as he described his wife's latest hospital visit, the mounting medical bills, the fear that kept him awake at night. When Sophia entered, Isabella jumped up. Sophia, you're here too! The 2 girls hugged, and Alexander watched Carlos's face transform with confusion as he tried to understand why his daughter's friend was in the CEO's office. Mr. Hernandez, Alexander said, your contract was changed illegally by executives who have been fired. The original terms are being restored immediately. Full health insurance, bi-weekly pay, all protections intact. For you and every worker on the Henderson project. Carlos stared at him. How did you know? Who told you? Alexander looked at Sophia, who was now showing Isabella her medical journal. Your daughter's friend did. Sophia saw the contracts being altered and reported it. She saved your family, Mr. Hernandez, and about 2,000 other families just like yours. Carlos turned to look at Sophia with an expression of profound gratitude. You did this? You helped us? Sophia looked embarrassed. I just told the truth. Mr. Sterling did the real work. No, Alexander said firmly. You did the hard part. Telling the truth when it's dangerous, when you might not be believed, when it would be easier to stay silent. That's real courage. His intercom buzzed. Patricia's voice was tight with stress. Sir, the forensic team found something. The offshore accounts. They're connected to a shell corporation that owns the construction company we're using for Henderson. The same executives who changed the contracts also own the company that benefits from reduced labor costs. Alexander felt rage building in his chest. It wasn't just theft. It was a complete corruption of the entire system. They'd created a company to exploit workers, then altered contracts to funnel money to themselves through that company. How many executives are involved? Alexander asked. 8 that we've confirmed so far. Maybe more. Sir, this is bigger than we thought. This is systematic fraud at the highest levels of the company. Alexander looked at Carlos, at his work-worn hands and worried eyes, at Isabella, who should have been playing with friends instead of worrying about her mother's medicine, at Sophia, who'd risked everything to protect people she loved. At Rosa, who'd raised a child with more integrity than executives making millions. Patricia, contact the FBI, Alexander said. This is beyond internal investigation now. And get me legal. I want every executive involved fired and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That's going to gut the leadership team, Patricia warned. Then we'll rebuild it with people who actually deserve to be there, Alexander replied. He turned to Rosa. Mrs. Morales, I'm going to need your answer on that job offer sooner than expected, and I want to expand it. I need you to help me identify every policy, every practice, every aspect of this company that treats workers as disposable. Can you do that? Rosa looked overwhelmed. Sir, I don't know anything about corporate restructuring, but you know what it's like to be afraid to speak up because you might lose your job, Alexander said. You know what it's like to choose between medicine and food. You know what it's like to be invisible in a building full of people. That knowledge is more valuable than any MBA. He looked at Carlos. Mr. Hernandez, I'm creating a workers' council. Elected representatives from every department and project who will have direct input on policies affecting labor. I'd like you to serve on it. Carlos opened and closed his mouth several times. I just pour concrete. I'm not qualified to... You're qualified to know when you're being treated unfairly, Alexander interrupted. That's exactly the qualification I need. The office fell silent. Two workers and their daughters, standing in a billionaire's office, being offered power and voice in a system designed to keep them silent. Why? Rosa finally asked. Why are you really doing this? Alexander thought about Marcus's contempt, about his own blind arrogance, about how close he'd come to being complicit in something monstrous. Because your daughter showed me that the most important voices in this company were the ones I'd never bothered to hear, he said honestly. And because if I don't fix this, really fix it, then I'm just as guilty as the people who created the corruption. His phone rang. It was security. Sir, there are news vans outside. Someone leaked the executive firings. The press wants a statement. Alexander looked at Sophia and Isabella, playing quietly in the corner while their parents navigated this new, impossible reality. Tell them I'll make a statement in 1 hour, Alexander said, and that it's going to change everything. The press conference room on the ground floor of Sterling Global had been hastily prepared. 23 journalists crammed into a space designed for 12, their cameras and microphones creating a forest of technology pointed at the podium where Alexander would soon stand. Patricia briefed him in the adjacent room. Sir, legal recommends we keep this brief. Confirm the firings, cite ongoing investigation, take no questions. The FBI wants minimal disclosure until... No, Alexander said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. For the first time in his career, he wasn't concerned about projecting power or control. He was concerned about telling the truth. I'm taking questions. All of them. That's a terrible idea, Patricia said bluntly. You could compromise the investigation, open us to lawsuits, tank the stock price. The stock price deserves to tank, Alexander interrupted. We built that value on fraud. Let it fall. We'll rebuild it honestly. He walked to the podium before Patricia could protest further. The camera flashes were blinding. Questions erupted immediately. Journalists shouting over each other. Mr. Sterling, is it true you fired 8 executives today? Are criminal charges being filed? How much money was stolen? Alexander held up his hand. The room quieted slowly. I'll make a statement, then take questions. All of them. He gripped the podium, looking directly into the cameras. This morning, I learned that members of my executive team had been systematically stealing from Sterling Global Enterprises and from the workers we employ. The fraud totals over $43 million and involves at least 8 senior executives, including my former director of construction operations and CFO. The room erupted again. Alexander waited for silence. These executives created shell corporations, altered worker contracts to reduce protections and wages, and funneled the difference into offshore accounts. The theft has been ongoing for approximately 3 years. The FBI has been contacted and a full criminal investigation is underway. How did you discover this? A journalist called out. Alexander paused. He could give a corporate answer, something about internal auditing and due diligence. But Sophia deserved better than to be erased from her own story. A 7-year-old girl told me, Alexander said simply. The daughter of one of our cleaning staff witnessed 2 executives altering contracts. She reported it to me. I verified her account and discovered the full scope of the fraud. The journalists went silent, clearly not expecting that answer. A child uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, someone asked skeptically. A child saw something wrong and had the courage to report it, Alexander corrected. While adults with advanced degrees and six-figure salaries were either participating in the fraud or too intimidated to speak up, a 7-year-old girl recognized injustice and refused to stay silent. "What's her name?" multiple journalists asked simultaneously. "I'm not disclosing her identity," Alexander said firmly. "She and her family deserve privacy. But I will say this. She showed more integrity in one act of courage than this company has shown in 3 years of record profits." A reporter from the Financial Times stood. "Mr. Sterling, you're personally worth over $3 billion. You've built your reputation on ruthless efficiency and maximizing shareholder value. Why should anyone believe this sudden concern for workers isn't just damage control?" The question hung in the air. Alexander could feel every camera focused on him, waiting for the corporate spin, the calculated response. "You shouldn't believe it," Alexander said, his honesty clearly shocking the room. "I've spent 20 years building a company that valued profit over people. I've fired employees for missing quotas during family emergencies. I've approved budget cuts that reduced worker safety. I've celebrated executives who extracted maximum productivity at minimum cost." He took a breath. "I was wrong about all of it, and I can't undo 20 years of damage in one press conference, but I can commit to doing better starting today." "What does better mean specifically?" another journalist pressed. "It means every worker contract altered by these executives is being restored to original terms immediately. It means we're creating a workers' council with real power to influence company policy. It means executive compensation will be tied to worker welfare, not just stock price. It means transparency in how we treat the people who actually build what we sell." "Your stock is already down 12% since news broke," someone noted. "Shareholders won't tolerate this kind of restructuring." "Then they can sell their shares," Alexander said flatly. "I'd rather have a company worth less that treats people with dignity than a company worth billions built on exploitation." The room buzzed with shocked murmurs. This wasn't the Alexander Sterling they knew, the ruthless deal-maker, the corporate shark, the man who'd once told a business magazine that sentiment is a liability. "Mr. Sterling," a young reporter from a labor publication stood, "you mentioned restoring contracts. Does that include back pay for what workers lost during the fraud?" Alexander nodded. "Every worker affected will receive full compensation for reduced wages and benefits over the past 3 years, plus damages. We estimate the total cost at around $15 million. Patricia made a strangled sound from the side of the room. That number hadn't been approved by legal or the board. Alexander had just committed to it publicly, without authorization. "One final question," Alexander said, pointing to a veteran journalist from the Times. "Mr. Sterling, why should workers trust you? You've admitted you've exploited them for 20 years. What's different now besides getting caught?" Alexander thought about Sophia's face when she'd described Isabella's mother in the hospital, about Carlos's hands, scarred from years of concrete work, about Rosa's exhaustion from juggling 3 jobs to keep her children fed. "What's different is that for the first time in my career, I actually see them," Alexander said quietly. "I see their faces. I know their names. I understand that every policy decision I make affects real families with real struggles. And I can't unsee that now, even if I wanted to." He stepped away from the podium. Questions erupted behind him, but he kept walking, out of the press room, into the elevator, up to his office where Rosa, Carlos, Sophia and Isabella waited with Michael Torres, his head of security. "How bad was it?" Rosa asked nervously. "I told the truth," Alexander said. "So it was either the best press conference of my career, or the end of it." He looked at Sophia. "I didn't use your name, but I told them what you did. Was that okay?" Sophia nodded seriously. "People should know that telling the truth matters." Michael cleared his throat. "Sir, we have a problem. The building is surrounded. Not just press. Workers from the Henderson Project. Hundreds of them. They're demanding to speak with you." Alexander walked to the window. 93 floors below, the plaza was filled with people in work clothes and hard hats. They held signs. "Restore our contracts," And workers are not disposable. They're angry, Michael said. Security is concerned about— Let me talk to them, Alexander said. Sir, that's a security nightmare. You can't just walk into a crowd of angry workers. Yes, I can, Alexander said firmly. Get me a microphone. I'm going down. The elevator ride to the ground floor felt longer than usual. Rosa, Carlos, Sophia, and Isabella had insisted on coming with him. If you're going to talk to workers, you should have workers standing with you, Carlos had said. When the lobby doors opened, Alexander could hear the crowd chanting. Michael and 4 security guards flanked them as they walked outside into the autumn afternoon. The noise was deafening. Hundreds of voices, angry and desperate, demanding justice. When the crowd saw Alexander, the chanting turned to shouting. Thief! Where's our money? We have families to feed. Alexander stepped up to a makeshift platform near the building entrance. The microphone screeched with feedback before settling. The crowd quieted slightly, waiting. My name is Alexander Sterling, he began, his voice amplified across the plaza. I own this company, and I owe you an apology. The crowd stirred uncertainly. For 3 years my executives stole from you. They reduced your wages, cut your benefits, and put your families at risk. And I didn't know because I didn't bother to check. I trusted men who viewed you as numbers on a spreadsheet instead of human beings. A worker near the front shouted, So what are you going to do about it? Every altered contract is being restored today, Alexander said. Original terms, full benefits, proper protections. You'll receive back pay for everything stolen from you, plus 50% additional as damages for the harm caused. The crowd was quieter now, listening. But money isn't enough, Alexander continued. I'm creating a workers' council, elected representatives from every project who will have direct input on company policies. Real power, not symbolic. If Sterling Global makes a decision that affects your working conditions, you'll have a voice in that decision. Why should we trust you? Someone yelled. You're just trying to avoid lawsuits. You're right, Alexander said simply. I am trying to avoid lawsuits. But more than that, I'm trying to build a company I can actually be proud of. And I can't do that without you. He gestured to Carlos. This is Carlos Hernandez. He's one of you, a concrete specialist on Henderson. He's also the first member of the new Workers' Council. He'll be selecting 4 more representatives over the next week. They'll have my direct line. They'll attend board meetings. And they'll have the power to veto any policy that endangers worker welfare. Carlos stepped forward, visibly nervous. I'm just a regular guy, he told the crowd. I got 2 kids. My wife is sick. I'm scared of losing my job every single day. That's why Mr. Sterling asked me to do this, because I understand what you're going through. A woman in a hard hat called out, What about the executives who did this? What happens to them? They're being prosecuted, Alexander said. Every single one. The FBI is handling the investigation. They'll face criminal charges, fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time. The crowd's anger was slowly transforming into something else. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of hope. Sophia tugged on Alexander's sleeve. He bent down. Can I say something? She whispered. Alexander straightened, surprised. You want to address the crowd? She nodded firmly. Alexander lifted her up so she could reach the microphone. The crowd quieted immediately, confused by the sight of a small child at a labor protest. My name is Sophia, she said, her voice small but clear through the speakers. My mama cleans offices in this building. I saw the bad men changing your contracts. I told Mr. Sterling because my friend Isabella's mama needs medicine, and the bad men were taking away the insurance that pays for it. The crowd was absolutely silent now. Mr. Sterling listened to me even though I'm just a kid, Sophia continued. He's trying to fix what the bad men broke. He's scared too, I can tell, but he's trying anyway. Maybe you could help him? My mama says things get better when people work together. The simplicity of her words cut through the complexity of corporate fraud and labor relations. This was a child asking adults to consider cooperation instead of confrontation. A man in the front row, his face weathered from years of outdoor construction work, spoke up. The kid's got guts. I'll give Sterling that. He brought her down here to face us. That's more than most bosses would do. He looked at Alexander. We'll give you 1 chance. 1. But if you go back on your word, we walk. All of us. and we'll make sure every worker in the city knows what kind of man you are." "That's fair," Alexander said. "I wouldn't trust me either based on my history. All I can do is show you through actions, not words." The crowd began to disperse slowly, workers talking among themselves, some still angry, others cautiously hopeful. Carlos shook hands with dozens of his colleagues, explaining the Workers' Council concept, promising to fight for their interests. As Alexander walked back into the building with Rosa, Sophia, and Isabella, Michael approached with his phone. "Sir, the board is calling an emergency meeting. They're not happy about the $15 million in back pay you just committed to." "Tell them I'll be there in an hour," Alexander said. "And Michael, start looking for new board members. I have a feeling we're going to have some vacancies soon." In his office, Alexander found Patricia surrounded by laptops, her face pale. "The stock is down 18% now. 3 major investors have called threatening to dump their positions. Legal says you've exposed us to massive liability by admitting fault publicly. And," she looked up, tears in her eyes, "Jennifer just confessed everything. She kept detailed records of the entire scheme. She's cooperating with the FBI." Alexander felt a strange sense of relief. The old world was burning down. His carefully constructed empire of ruthless efficiency and moral compromise was collapsing, and for the first time in his adult life, he felt like he was building something that might actually matter. 6 months later, the 93rd floor of Sterling Global looked completely different. The intimidating mahogany furniture had been replaced with comfortable seating where employees actually felt welcome. The walls that once displayed expensive art now held photographs. Workers on construction sites, cleaning crews, families whose lives had been changed by the company's transformation. Alexander stood at his window, but he wasn't alone anymore. Carlos Hernandez sat across from him, reviewing proposals for the new worker safety program. Rosa Morales was at the conference table, leading a meeting with department heads about fair wage policies. And in the corner, Sophia and Isabella worked on homework together, occasionally looking up to ask questions that somehow always cut straight to the heart of complex issues. "The Henderson project finished ahead of schedule and under budget," Carlos reported, looking up from his tablet. "Turns out when you treat workers well and pay them fairly, they actually work harder." "Who knew?" Alexander smiled. 6 months ago, that comment would have felt like insubordination. Now it felt like friendship. The FBI concluded their investigation. Patricia entered, carrying a folder thick with documents. All 8 executives pled guilty. Marcus Whitmore got 12 years. David Chen got 10. The others between 5 and 8 years each. Full restitution ordered, plus fines. "And Jennifer?" Alexander asked quietly. 3 years. Suspended sentence because she cooperated fully, Patricia said. She provided evidence that exposed 2 other fraud schemes we didn't even know about. She's working with a non-profit now, teaching financial literacy to low-income families. Alexander nodded. Justice, but also redemption. It felt right. "Sir, the quarterly earnings report," Patricia continued, but her expression was uncertain. "Revenue is down 7% from last year. But profit margins are up 12%, Rosa interjected, looking up from her meeting. "Because we're not bleeding money through fraud and corruption. Clean business is actually more profitable." Imagine that. The board meeting that afternoon was nothing like the contentious gatherings of 6 months ago. 5 of the original members had resigned when Alexander refused to backtrack on worker protections. The replacements included 2 former union organizers, a labor lawyer, and a worker advocate. People who actually understood what it meant to build value without exploitation. Sterling Global is being featured in Harvard Business Review, Bernard Harrison announced, his tone grudging but respectful. "Case study on ethical restructuring. They're calling it the Sterling Transformation. The business schools want to study what we did." Alexander found that ironic. 6 months ago, those same schools had taught executives like Marcus that workers were expendable resources to be optimized. More importantly, Patricia added, we've had 1,200 applications for open positions this month. People want to work for a company that treats them with dignity. Employee retention is at 97%, highest in the industry. After the meeting, Alexander found Sophia in his office, reading a college-level economics textbook. At 8 years old, she was already being courted by prestigious private schools, offering full scholarships. "How's Riverside Academy?" Alexander asked, settling into the chair beside her. Sophia's face lit up. "We're studying systemic poverty and social studies. I told them about Mama's jobs and how hard she worked but still couldn't afford things. My teacher said I should write about it for the national essay competition." "Your teacher is right," Alexander said. "Your perspective is valuable, Sophia. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." "Mr. Sterling?" Sophia looked up at him with those two wise eyes. "Are you happy now?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "You smile more," Sophia observed. "6 months ago you smiled like this." She demonstrated a tight, professional expression. "Now you smile like this." A genuine, warm smile. The second one reaches your eyes. Alexander felt his throat tighten. "Yes, Sophia. I'm happier than I've been in 20 years. You gave me that gift." "I didn't give you anything," Sophia said seriously. "I just told you the truth. You're the one who chose to listen." That evening, Alexander attended the opening of the Rosa Morales Worker Advocacy Center, a facility funded by Sterling Global that provided legal assistance, financial counseling, and job training for workers across the city. The center was located in Sophia's old neighborhood, deliberately placed where it was most needed rather than most impressive. Rosa stood at the podium, looking elegant but still grounded. 6 months ago, I was a cleaning woman who'd accepted that invisibility was the price of survival, she told the crowd of workers, community leaders, and press. My daughter showed me that visibility, being seen, being heard, being valued, is a right, not a privilege. She looked at Alexander in the audience. Mr. Sterling didn't have to listen to a 7-year-old girl. He didn't have to believe her. He didn't have to risk his company, his reputation, his fortune to do the right thing. But he did. And that choice changed everything. The applause was thunderous. Alexander felt tears threatening, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. After the ceremony, Carlos found him on the center's steps, watching workers and their families explore the new facility. My wife's health is under control, Carlos said quietly. The insurance you restored covers everything: medication, monitoring equipment, specialist visits. Isabella doesn't cry herself to sleep anymore worrying about her mama. I'm glad, Alexander said, and meant it with his whole heart. You know what the crazy part is? Carlos continued. You're making more money now than when you were cutting corners. Turns out integrity is profitable. Who knew? Alexander laughed. Apparently, everyone except me. Inside, Sophia and Isabella were showing other children the center's library. 10,000 books, just like Sophia had dreamed about. They'd personally selected many of the titles, ensuring representation of every kind of kid who might walk through these doors. Alexander's phone buzzed. His daughter, Emily, who he'd barely spoken to in years. Dad, I saw the ceremony on the news. I'm proud of you. Want to have dinner this weekend? I'd like you to meet your grandson. His name is Marcus. We call him Mark. He just turned 2. A grandson he'd never met because he'd been too busy building an empire to maintain relationships. Alexander felt the weight of lost years, but also the possibility of found ones. He texted back, I'd love that more than anything. As the sun set over the city, Alexander stood with Rosa, Carlos, Sophia, and Isabella on the center's rooftop garden, a green space in a concrete neighborhood, another impossibility made real. Mr. Sterling, Isabella asked, why do grown-ups make things so complicated? Sophia just told the truth and everything got better. Alexander knelt down to her level. You're absolutely right, Isabella. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that simple truth matters more than complicated lies. Your friend reminded me. Sophia smiled. My mama says the best thing about mistakes is you can learn from them. Did you learn from yours? I'm still learning, Alexander admitted. Every single day. But yes, I learned that the most important voices are often the quietest. That courage comes in small packages. That real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity. And that sometimes, the people you think need you the most are actually the ones who save you. He looked at these 4 people. A concrete worker, a former cleaning woman, and 2 8-year-old girls, who had transformed not just his company, but his entire understanding of what mattered in life. Thank you, Alexander said simply, for seeing something worth saving in me. Rosa smiled. We saw what you couldn't see in yourself. That's what family does. Family. 6 months ago, Alexander had been alone at the top of his tower, surrounded by expensive things and people who feared him. Now he was surrounded by people who challenged him, cared for him, and weren't afraid to tell him when he was wrong. He'd lost an empire built on exploitation. He'd gained a life built on purpose. The billionaire who'd once measured success by how many people feared him now measured it by how many people he could help. And it all started because a 7-year-old girl whispered, "Sir, I saw them changing the contract." And a man who'd spent his life ignoring truth finally chose to listen.
"I saw them changing the contract," the girl whispered, her voice trembling but certain. The millionaire had been moments away from signing what he believed was a landmark deal, one that would cement his position at the top. But her words stopped him cold. As she revealed the truth, his pulse quickened. Hidden clauses, altered terms, and betrayal carefully crafted behind his back. The room seemed to shrink as he realized the people he trusted had planned to strip him of everything. Her quiet warning shattered the illusion, exposing the trap he had been blind to. And when the final documents were brought in, he looked up, not with confidence, but with the shock of a man who just saw his empire inches from collapse, saved only by the courage of a girl no one thought mattered.